All right, controlling access to records. What we're going to talk about is record level access. All right. And there is a whole slew of features associated with record level access. And so a number of different features in the product allow us to do stuff. And so we're going to get into not only what is record level access, but what are the things that are available to us to make that happen. All right. All right. There is something called, we refer to it as the sharing model. Think of it as within the force.com database, there are access control lists which determine who has access to which records. In addition, what level of access do those people have? Okay? So remember that with object CRUD, I kept on emphasizing that it's merely the potential to read, create, edit, and delete those records. But until you have access to a specific record, you can't do any of those things. And that's what this determines. Is, okay, well, which ones do we have access to? Now, in our case, we've been spoiled. And the reason is that every one of you is logged in as with a system administrator profile, and you have modify all data. So you can click on anything. But one of the things you'll notice is if you log in as one of those other users, someone who's not Phil Katz or a member of the recruiter queue, you'll be very limited in terms of the number of records that you see. And the reason is you don't have the record level access. Okay? All right, so access to records is dependent on CRUD. So even if I say, if I go into the tool and using one of these mechanisms, I say, I grant you the ability to read this record. If your CRUD, object level CRUD, says you don't have the potential to read it, you do not have the read permission, then you're not going to be able to see it regardless of what I do. Okay? Yeah. Okay. All right, there are 3 levels of access. Okay? The first level of access is called full access. Full access means that you can view records, you can edit them, you can share them with other people, you can make other people the owner, transfer ownership to someone else, and you can delete them. Okay, so those are all the things that if you're if you have full access, those are all the things you can do. You can also have read-write privileges. If you have read-write privileges, you can do 2 things. You can view and you can edit that particular record. And then finally, read-only. So you can only view this record. Okay. All right. All right, so 3 levels of access. There are a number of different ways to obtain these different levels of access. Okay. Now, full access is roughly synonymous with ownership. Okay. So the way that you obtain full access is typically you're the owner of the record. Okay. So not only can you edit it and view it, but you can actually make the owner someone else. You can share it with other people. In other words, open up access to it, and you can delete it. You are the owner. Okay. Now there's something called role hierarchies. We'll come back to that, but that's another mechanism to obtain full access. And then the profile permission, modify all data. Modify all data it's not read-write all data, it's actually full access. You obtain, when you have that single checkbox on the profile, modify all data, you are essentially, you not only can edit all the records, you have owner level access or full level access. Okay? All right, there's read, write, and then read only. Now, I refer to these as sharing level access. And the reason is that the way you obtain Read, write access, and read only is typically someone shares the record with you, and they specify you shall be able to edit this record or you shall be able to read it only. Okay? Now there's a number of different features that we have that will share a record with or provide this level of access. Org-wide defaults, we'll talk about these. This is a feature. Role hierarchies, well, once again, we'll talk about that. Manual sharing is where you actually go into the tool and you say, this record, this user has access to this record and here's what they can do with it. Okay? It's something that your end users would do, all right? Specifically the owner. Apex, or sharing rules. Sharing rules is an automated mechanism to share data, share records. And then Apex sharing, which once again is automated, but it's much more flexible because we can write code to do different things. And then finally, there's a profile permission, view all data. And view all data allows us to, obviously it's not read-write, but you have the ability to see all the records if you have view all data. Okay? All right.
This is profile permission on the object at the object level.
Well, I mean, it really doesn't, since it's just view, whether it's done at an object level or whether it's done at, there's actually a checkbox on the profile, the permission, called view all data.
That's the global.
Yeah, but there's no difference between view all data or view all on the object type. I mean, this view all data, taking a look here, let's see here. You know, the view all data here, which is applied globally, in terms of its functionality, there's no difference between that checkbox and then if I would have gone in and checked all these view all checkboxes for every object. Now, obviously, these only apply on a per object basis, but they both end up doing the same thing. So, okay, all right.
But they had a difference, as you found out today.
The difference that I discovered was with modify all. And what I suspect is that the difference I discovered was if this was, this is what I suspect. This one, it says modify all data. It really should be own all data because you have full access, you have ownership level privileges for all records, okay? So modify all data is undercutting the level of access. It should be full access on all data. I suspect that this one down here that says modify all, this is only granting read-write access. You're not actually granting ownership level. I should test that out. But I suspect that's what's going on. That this one really means edit all or read-write all.
Maybe this view all and the and the permission level is also working the same way.
Override field level security.
Yeah, field level security is not overwritten by this one, but it's overwritten by the other one.
Okay, you're right, yeah. So you're probably right that the permission, if you did the field level security and made it not visible, yeah, I haven't tested that one out, but I suspect you'd be correct, assuming on the same behavior, yeah. All right. Okay. All right, so let's compare. So our profiles, all right, there's object and field level access, but the sharing model is record level access. So a profile, it says it might specify that a user can see candidates. I like to rephrase this and say, user's profile might specify that a user has the potential to see candidates, okay? But the sharing model determines which candidates that user can see, okay? All right. All right. Any questions about that? All right. Record ownership. Every record has an owner. There's an owner field, and the owner field can be set to one of two things. It's either a user or a queue. Now there's an exception to this, and the exception is that a record which is a detail in a master-detail relationship inherits ownership and access from the parent, the master record. Okay? So there is no owner to a child record in a master-detail relationship. All those access privileges. In fact, everything we're talking about here with respect to record-level access, none of it applies to children records in a master detail. They all inherit from the parent. Okay?
So you cannot change the owner and the child level?
In a master detail relationship.
They won't even available?
Yep. Yep. They inherit from the parent. So whoever the owner of the parent is, they are also the owner of all of the children.
But I thought you can change it as an administrator, you can change the ownership for
Trent.
the child.
No. So let's show this. So if I have a job application, let's see if this has any associated reviews. Review. Why not? Oh, I clicked on a position. That's why I can't find any reviews. So here's a review. So here's my owner field on my job application. And then if we click on the review, let's see. It doesn't even display it. Yeah, it doesn't even display it. I thought it was going to display it, but then show whoever the other owner was. But that's being inherited from the job application.
So what if you have an owner assigned before you say there's a master detail relationship? Would it override what's the owner of the children?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if you created review record or a bunch of review records and a bunch of job application records, and then you said now review is a I haven't tested that specific scenario. What I have tested is I've done some stuff where behind the scenes there's essentially some tables which are storing this information, and when you enable certain features which make all the data redundant, like for instance in this case, it just removes the table. And so there is no table behind the scenes tracking who the owners are for reviews, because there are no owners for reviews. It's all based on the related job application. So once you create that master detail relationship, the database table that contains the access privileges, that gets deleted. So it would no longer exist. So yes, the ownership is gone. Yeah, it's all now based on the owner of the masters. So, all right. Yes.
You can actually write an Apex program to create records, right?
Yeah. So to create records.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
And
Sure.
Every record needs to have an owner.
Uh-huh.
You have to, in the program, include the owner that should be assigned to those new records, or is it
You
like
could.
a default owner?
You could set who the owner is via code, but typically what the database does is whoever created the record, they are the owner. So if you don't specify who the owner is, it defaults to whoever created it. So the created by. Notice if yesterday I created a position, I didn't necessarily set myself to be the owner, but notice it defaults to me. So here, the owner field, even though I haven't even filled anything out, it's me. Same thing goes whether we're doing it in code or, for that matter, Web Services API. Now, this is in code. You could change this via code. For that matter, you could edit the record after you created it and then change it. Okay? So, all right? Does that answer the question? All right. So, and then finally, owners have full access. Okay? There's only one owner for a record. Okay? If you want multiple people to be the owner, create a queue. That's what queues are for. All right, let's talk about our first feature that we're going to utilize to provide record level access. It's called org-wide defaults or organization-wide defaults. So we have this thing here. There will never be any position that an employee is not permitted to see. That second bullet is the key one here. So we're saying, look, you know, we're not going to hide. We might be hiding fields on positions. We might be doing some stuff where people can't edit particular positions. But we do have a golden rule, which is everyone can at least view positions. Okay? All right. And so what we're going to do is, a lot of this is associated with stuff that will come later, but what we're going to focus on is that second bullet there, which is everyone can view positions. The way we can enable that simply and quickly is using something called org-wide defaults. So with an org-wide default, what we can do is we can specify a default level of access for everyone in the organization. Everyone can read these records, or everyone can edit these records. Okay, read-write access. Now the flip of that is, what if I don't want to open up all records to all users? Well then, in my org-wide default, I would need to set the access level, the default access level, to private. In other words, people will have to use other mechanisms to share records or provide access to records. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at. All right. Let's actually walk through this. Now, the thing about org-wide defaults is they are org-wide. Therefore, it's kind of the least common denominator thing here. So you have to ask, who is the most restricted user of this object? And they determine what the org-wide default is going to be. Because if you have that one person who shouldn't be seeing or editing these records, then they kind of ruin it for everyone else, because now you can't share it with everyone. Okay. So who is the most restricted user of this object? Is there ever going to be an instance where this object, that user shouldn't be allowed to see? So it says instance of this object. That's a code phrase for record. Is there ever a record that this user shouldn't be able to see? If the answer is yes, if there's stuff that they should not be able to see, records they shouldn't be able to see, then we're going to set our sharing model or our org-wide default equal to private. Is there ever going to be an instance? So if the answer is no, then we ask, okay, well, is it read-only? Can they edit it? If the answer is, so is there ever a record that this user shouldn't be allowed to edit? If the answer to that question is yes, then we'd set it to read-only. If the answer to that question is no, then we just set the org-wide default equal to read-write. Okay? All right. Does that make sense? Or does that, the thing about org-wide defaults is they're org-wide. So, all right. Some considerations. So org-wide defaults don't apply to the detail records in a master detail relationship. Right? The opposite is true of lookup relationships, but that's always true. I mean, those first two bullets apply to any record level access feature. Okay. Okay, it says changing org-wide defaults can produce unintended consequences. Consider your business requirements carefully before setting org-wide defaults. What does that mean? Well, what goes on behind the scenes is that if you set the org-wide default equal to public read-write, we don't need the database table to track who has what level of access, right? And so it actually goes out and deletes it. So if you set up all this stuff and then you go, you know what, let's open it up for one day, have it be read-write, it deletes the table. And then you go, all right, now let's set it back to private. Well, the table's gone. All those settings that you had previously set up are gone. So don't flip org-wide defaults on and off, okay? Because it treats redundant sharing as unnecessary and it cleans itself up. The database cleans itself up. So that's what that fourth bullet is showing right there. Okay? Redundant access. All right. All right, let me quickly show you where you can set up your org-wide defaults. Org-wide defaults are here under security controls. And what we can set up is we can go in here, excuse me, click on sharing settings. And then what you do is you can do sharing settings for a specific object, or we can just click on edit here. And then it's here where we can set all our custom objects to be either, for instance here, candidate or position. So we could set this equal to private, public read only, or public read write. Okay. So here's where we can, for instance in this case, set up our positions in order to be available or at least readable by everyone, viewable by everyone by setting this equal to read only. Okay? So that's kind of a, and then you click on the old Say button. For the standard objects up here, there's different custom settings, so it's not, you know, there's a bunch of other settings, but these are only available for standard objects. Once you get into your custom objects, it's one of three things. Okay?
When we say private, I think we are going to do something else later about those private, right?
If it's private, then we're saying we're not sharing it with everyone. Therefore, we need to use the other items that are, or the other components which are available, the other features, in order to provide access to those records. Because if we don't, let's say, let's pretend that org-wide defaults and anything we've talked about except for ownership doesn't exist. Well, if that were so, the only people who could see the records would be owners. Okay? So,
Say private, but don't do anything else, then the only owners.
exactly. So if our org-wide defaults are private and we don't use any of the other features, really only the owners and the sysadmins are going to be able to see the records.
When you say the other features, you are talking about.
We're going to talk about other features. So org-wide defaults is the first feature that allows you to automate sharing, automate access to records. We're also going to talk about other features that allow you to provide access. So a lot of this afternoon is like, all right, here's feature number 1 that you can use to provide access to records. Here's feature number 2. So we're going to go through role hierarchies, sharing roles, apex sharing reasons. So we'll get into more stuff. Okay? So, but the first one is org-wide defaults. Lyra.
If I have set the object level permission to say no one can read this, or this profile can read this.
Yeah.
And then as an owner, I share my record to a person that belongs to that profile.
Yeah.
Would that person see it?
No.
No.
Yeah. So the you know, the whole thing about, you know, the org-wide, I mean, I'm sorry, the object level CRUD still comes into play. So even in org-wide defaults. So the thing about that lowest level of access for a user, you know, if, yeah, this is one I probably should test out just to make sure. There's another 90% sure on this one, but the org-wide defaults, if you don't have the potential to read, for instance, candidates, then even if I set the public sharing model equal to public read-write, users of that profile don't have the ability to read that. So, is that what your question was? Okay, all right. All right. All right, so I'll test that out during the break. Like I said, I just want to verify that one. And why don't we do this? Why don't we work on exercise 3-1 and 3-2. You're going to create some org-wide defaults, and then we'll do a little quiz questions. All right? All right, there's a cool feature that Raj found under security controls, field accessibility. Kind of does a report based on 3 criteria. The fields, profiles, and record types. And so if you click on, for instance, fields, it shows you for a particular field what profiles and which record types, what is the editability and readability and all that of that particular field. And then the other ones, among those 3 dimensions, it slices and dices it those 3 different ways. Okay? So kind of a good place if you want to know, you know, probably I think the use case for this would be a user is complaining that they can't see something or edit something or something along those lines. At least from a profile-based and then record type, you know, capability, you can see what, you know, what's happening in terms of why they may or may not see that.
Sorry, where did you go for that? Oh,
Security controls and then field accessibility. There's also, I did a little test, and I logged in as Phil Katz. I wonder if the, yes, okay. So this is, I just basically took a URL for an offer, and what I did was I set, in order to run this test, I set object level CRUD equal to nothing. So Phil can't read, create, edit, or delete offers. Okay. Then what I did was this one was already set up. The org-wide default for this is public read-write. Okay. Then what I did, I just logged in as Phil Katz. I attempt to access the record, and it says insufficient privileges. So even though via org-wide defaults, I said that everyone in the org has read-write access, Phil's limited org or object CRUD prevented Phil from seeing this record. Okay?
And where did you do that for Phil? To limit it on his profile?
Profile, yep. So Phil's profile, what I did was, Phil is a hiring manager. And so if we scroll down here, you'll see that here is offers, and I removed read level access, or the basic access level of read. Phil can't do anything. So this overrides org-wide defaults. All right. All right, how about some quiz questions? Who did I leave off on? I always forget that. You're the first one, Anu? Okay. True or false? Child records and master detail relationships have their own org-wide defaults.
I think it's false.
It is false. Yeah, they do not. They inherit from the master. Exactly. What is the most restrictive level of access that can be set on org-wide defaults?
Private?
Private. Yeah. Oh, Leah's on top. She's all ready and.
No, I'm not. I was holding my breath, hoping you wouldn't see me.
Oh, it's a true false.
You go to the next person.
True or false? Org-wide defaults can be set for both standard and custom objects.
Oh. Yeah. Oh, my life, I have to go with false. That's my
You're
final
just
answer.
doing that for show, right?
No, I am.
So org-wide defaults can be set
Oh,
for
okay.
both
I
standard
always
and
get it
custom.
confused with, I get org-wide defaults in profiles.
Uh-huh.
Because profiles can't.
Oh, standard profiles?
can,
Yeah.
And OWD can.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm learning like everyone.
Let's see here. Under sharing settings and then org-wide defaults. So for instance, leads, accounts, contacts, or contracts. So we can set up different org-wide defaults. Now the thing about standard objects is that they have some crazy different ones. So standard or custom objects always have the, the basics, but yeah, okay.
So is it like true or false?
Oh, so I just always, whatever Leah says, I always just say the opposite just to mess with her. So org-wide defaults can be set for both, so that's true. So org-wide defaults can be set for both standard and custom objects.
I have a question.
Yes.
You just showed a screen, right? So I saw something controlled by parent. What does that mean?
Oh, that's referring to our details and a master detail. For instance, let's see here. So notice that job posting is not available. All I see is job posting site. And if I go back here, here's job posting. It says controlled by parent. Why does job posting show up in this list as controlled by parent, but job posting does not show up in the available list of custom objects that I can set for org-wide defaults?
Is it a child component? versus
Exactly.
the others?
It's a child in a master detail relationship. So, same thing, there should be review. There it is. Review controlled by parent. Our review is a child in a master detail relationship. Okay. All right. Good stuff. This is tough. All right. So if even one person in your org is not allowed to see position data, what must your org-wide default be? So, Raj.
Well, it should be private, but I think you just proved that.
Yeah, I just proved something different, but so this is a little bit of a tricky question. So, you could set up your profile security to prevent the org-wide or the object CRUD to prevent people from seeing that, and therefore it wouldn't be required to be private. This is getting it that you would need to be private, but
That would make more sense, right? That if you just got one person that doesn't need access, you allow the whole org,
create a, yeah.
and then remove
Yeah.
that person's.
There's probably something special about that person too. Maybe you give them the read-only profile. Yeah, so yeah, it's something you could do is to simply protect with or object CRUD. Yeah.
By default, is it private?
So,
By default, or is it private?
Oh, good question. What is the default? And I'm going to take a look at my demo object, and by default it is public read write. So by default it's open. So you got to close it. Yeah. All right. All right. So Talon, you're next, okay? But next quiz. All right. All right, roles and groups of users. All right, so let's talk about roles and groups of users. All right, there's something called role hierarchies. Role hierarchies allow us to automate the sharing of records with other users based on their position in a hierarchy. Okay? So we might have something where we have our sales rep and the sales manager. And so the sales manager is a manager for 3 sales reps. And it turns out that they can see, we want to enable it so that the sales manager can see everything that the other manager, or that the reps have access to. Role hierarchies allow us to create a hierarchy in which people above the person below them can inherit or obtain access through their position in the hierarchy. Okay? So if we take a look at universal containers, these are all our users in universal containers. So there's really two departments for the most part in universal containers. There's human resources and then development. Okay? And so development, you know, we have that roll up in those three groups, and then you know, both of those departments then ultimately report up to to Cynthia, our CEO. Okay. All right. So one of the things that you can do is you can assign a role to a user. Okay. And when you assign a role, that role has a position in the role hierarchy. Okay? So for instance, going back to here, the way that this works is that we'd identify a role hierarchy in a bunch of roles. So here, for instance, director of QA and the QA engineer, those are 2 separate roles, and then we would assign users to those roles. Okay, a user is a member of a single role. All right. So the role hierarchy controls data visibility. It always rolls up. It does not roll sideways. So what this does not do is it does not mean, taking a look at Flash Stevenson and Harry Potterham over in the lower right-hand corner, Flash does not see Harry's records, and Harry does not see Flash's records from a role hierarchy. Role hierarchy rolls up. Does not, it's not a peer level of access. Okay. We got sued by, you know, the Harry Potter people.
Yeah.
So it was ugly.
That's why we went from Harry Potter to Potterman.
Potterham.
Potterham.
Potterham. All right. It says users usually inherit the special privileges of data owned or shared with users below them in the hierarchy. Now the reason it says usually is because on an object-by-object basis, you can churn role hierarchies on or off. Okay? So notice this line of checkboxes over here, grant access using hierarchies. If I click on Edit, first of all, it's always turned on for standard objects. Okay? But for custom objects, you can turn it on and off. So you can say, all right, in this case, for candidate references and candidate snapshots, do not grant access using the role hierarchy. Okay? So you can turn it off for specific objects. Okay? It's not necessarily the company's organizational chart. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean, you don't have to do it according to, you know, who's above who and the way that your org chart looks. You know, going back to my sales manager and sales reps, there might be a sales administrator who's not necessarily above the sales reps in the org hierarchy, but the sales administrator has access to all their data. And so maybe the sales administrator is the highest person in the role hierarchy because they ultimately need access to everyone's stuff because of what they do. Okay? So it's not, doesn't have to necessarily be the org chart. All right. Here's that grant access using hierarchies. So talked about that. Can churn that on and off. All right, so Talon, are you ready to do a question? So assuming that org-wide defaults are set to private. All right, so let's pretend that org-wide defaults aren't turned on. And grant access using hierarchies is checked. What can Cynthia Capobianco see? And do you see Cynthia?
I think she will see everything.
She'll see everything, yeah. So everything rolls up to her. Now, yeah, I'll talk about this later, but okay, so Murat, can Andrew Goldberg see records owned by Amy Lojak? Can he edit them?
Can Murat see Andrew Goldberg anywhere? Yeah, here. And
Andrew Goldberg is the VP of Development,
Amy.
and Amy Lojak is a product manager.
Okay. See, records on my. Yes.
So the first part of the question is, can Andrew Goldberg see the records owned by Amy Lojak?
Yes.
Okay, can Andrew Goldberg edit the records owned by Amy Lojak?
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, not only can Andrew Goldberg see and edit them, but Andrew Goldberg is going to get owner level access, full level access. Okay? Role hierarchies is one thing where it applies. It not only does share level access like read, write, and read only, it also does full access, which is ownership level access. So if you're above the owner, you will inherit owner level access. Can Megan Smith edit records owned by Mario Ruiz?
Yes.
So Lyra, let's see here. Where's Megan? There she is, the VP of Human Resources. Can she edit records owned by Mario Ruiz? Yes, she can. Very good. Now there's one thing I want to point out, which is not all users have to be assigned roles. Okay? In which case they're not going to participate in this model. Okay, so if they're users, you don't necessarily have to set it up so that everyone is participating in the role hierarchy. You might have only half your company utilizing the role hierarchy, and the other half doesn't. Well, if they're not at the bottom of the pyramid, then their records aren't going to roll up to the people above them. Okay.
Can you have more than one hierarchy in a company?
For role hierarchies, no, you cannot. So there's only one hierarchy, only one pyramid. Now there's a feature called territory management, which is more flexible but more complicated, that allows users to be members of different groups, kind of thing. And it's something that we don't talk about in this class, but there is, if you want something more flexible than this, investigate territory management. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be territories. It can be department management or any number of different reasons you want to come up with some different sharing. So there are other features that are available that do this. Okay.
But there's only one role hierarchy model.
Exactly. So there's only one role hierarchy. Yep.
But if you can put just one administrator at the top, you can combine different hierarchies to one, and in fact you can overcome, I think, this restriction.
Yeah. Sure.
And
Yeah,
you
by
can
creating
think of those
multiple branches, you mean?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
if you take out this Cynthia out of this, there is two hierarchies there.
Yeah.
So you have two hierarchies, but you have to give an administrator at the top.
Yeah, good point, good point. Let's get going on our next topic. Our next topic is going to be public groups. Public groups in of themselves don't do anything. But public groups allow us to create groups of people, to associate groups of people, and then in other features reference that group of people. Okay? But unlike a role, where if you just add a person to a role or assign a role to them, it immediately does something. In a public group, you have to then use that public group later on. So all a public group is a public group is simply a bunch of users or other groups. So it's at the end of the day, though, it's a collection of users that we are then going to want to be able to refer to when we do something else. Okay?
That's not the thing you talk about in territory groups, right?
No. Territory management is its own thing. Much like, it's kind of like Translation Workbench in the sense that you need to call support in order to enable it for your org. So it's a not on by default thing, but public groups are on by default. So, it can be used in a sharing rule. We'll talk about sharing rules in a bit. It can be used when manually sharing. It can be used for a number of purposes, including giving access to folders. You can assign, one of the things that you can do in Salesforce is to upload documents, unstructured data, content, and you can provide access to folders of documents, or we can also do it with dashboards and reports and stuff like that. Yes, question?
Can you assign a group to a profile? So that all
No.
the users that belongs to that group automatically gets a profile?
No, so the question is, can you assign a public group to a profile? No, no. Public groups are used solely for the purpose, really, of providing access to a group of people, whether it be documents or records, which actually in Salesforce, documents are ultimately records. They have unique identifiers. So, no. Let me do this. Let me just kind of go through this, and then we'll try and maybe return and talk about what they do and don't do. All right. So every organization has one default public group, and that is the entire organization. One of the things that you would be able to do, for instance, is to go in via manual sharing, and I'll show you that in a bit, and say, I want to share this record with everyone in my org. You could do that using that default group called entire organization. Okay. All right. The members of public groups can be users, roles and subordinates, and other public groups. Okay, so they're pretty flexible in terms of what they can contain. So, roles and subordinates is pretty cool because going back to, remember, our role hierarchy, you could add, essentially here, if we added Andrew Goldberg as a member, as roles and subordinates, and we did VP of development, then that means we're sort of saying that whole wing of the company is a member of this public group now, and then we could assign access to not just Andrew Goldberg, but all the people who are in the role hierarchy going up to Andrew Goldberg. Okay. All right. Defining public groups are pretty straightforward. So once again, this is under Manage Users. And what you do is you create a new one, and you simply identify who the members of this group will be. So demo group. And you just go out here and say, okay, I want this specific user to be a member of this group, maybe this one too. And then any of the members of the, software engineer role, something like that. Okay. So now I have a public group that contains all these different people. Okay. All right. Now, where would you use this? So this is the thing: this is much like when we created queues, but then we didn't use them yet. So we haven't really used it. And in the next exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to go out there and notice this sharing button. We're going to get into manually sharing a record. And one of the things that you could do is, I'm not sure what's going on here. What did I do? I have a bunch of sharing rules. What did I do? All right. So then you could go out here and, for instance, when you manually share a record with a particular user, you could then specify a user that you want to share it with, or now we could reference our public group. And if I would have created that public, the demo group, I could have then said, all right, all these users and the members of this role now have either read-only or read-write access to this specific thing. Okay?
Are you only sharing one record, or you can share?
When
a
you're
list
doing
of-
manual sharing, it's only one record at a time.
Is there a way to do mass?
Well, so the question is there a way to do mass sharing? And within the default facilities of the tool, no. There's ways you can do it. You could write some Apex code with a Visualforce page and do it that way. You can also do things and automate using something called sharing rules, which we'll talk about in the next thing. So, yeah, so then you could then say, okay, you know, this public group, I want to share it with this public group, and then specify the level of access, and then click on Save. So we'll talk about manual sharing and sharing rules in the next section, but for now, we're going to just create the public group, and then later on, we're going to use it. Okay? All right. So let's create the public group, and then work on this lab exercise. So this is lab exercise 3-4. This is another short one, so let's spend 5 minutes on this, and then we will continue on the next topic. All right, we're going to talk about a couple of topics: sharing rules and manual sharing. So we already kind of touched on manual sharing. But taking a look at our org chart, or I shouldn't say our org chart, taking a look at our role hierarchy, we have some issues. And right now, Megan Smith's team over there in Human Resources can't see reviews owned by Andrew Goldberg's team. They're not able to benefit from the role hierarchy because they're on a different branch. And the org-wide defaults were set to a lower level than what they need. Ben Stewart can't see reviews written by the QA or the product management team. So one of the things that Ben might do is ask someone from one of the other development departments to interview one of his candidates, but he can't now read the review that they wrote. Okay. Melissa Lee cannot see records for candidates that she needs to interview. So we have a bunch of situations where we need to provide access. There are two things that we're going to utilize for these situations: sharing rules, which automate the sharing of records with other users or groups, and then manual sharing, which allows you on a record-by-record basis, your end users, to share a record with someone else. Okay. With sharing rules, it's based on who the owner is. We can automate that anytime this user or this group owns a record, let's now share it with this other user or group or role or whatever. Okay. Manual sharing, like I said, is your end users going in, doing what I did, click on that sharing button, and then add sharing in order to manually share it with another user. Okay. All right. All right. Let me show you sharing rules. So in the tool, if you're creating a sharing rule, what you do is it's under security controls and then sharing settings. And it's down below the org-wide defaults. So see how it has sharing rules for a bunch of different objects? Here it is for the candidate object. And when you create a new sharing rule, you say if it's owned by members of, or owned by, just owned by members of either public groups, queues, roles, or roles and subordinates. And you can select here, for instance, we can do all interviewers. Then share with public group, roles, or roles and subordinates. And if I select roles, then maybe we want to share it with the, you know, software development manager, or whatever it be. Okay? And then the level of access. Okay? Now the key thing to understand about sharing rules is that the only criteria is ownership. Okay? If it's owned by any of these groups, then that's the criteria. Okay? Now what if my criteria is not ownership based? So we were talking previously about, well, what if it's based on, you know, who the hiring manager is, or, you know, what the department is, whatever it may be. We have some criteria. Our business data, there's some conditional, you know, there's some behavior or some data on our business data that we want to utilize, okay? Now what we can do is we can go in and do manual sharing. In that case, the user could decide, you know, I need to go do something. In certain situations, I can go out and do that, okay? We can automate that. There's a third thing that exists, a third option, which is apex sharing, okay? And we'll talk about that in the next topic. But for right now, we're going to set up some sharing rules. And what we're going to do is we're going to give the recruiters access to anything owned over by the people in the development group or department. All right, so we're going to create a sharing rule to do that. And then we're going to pretend that we're one of the end users and go in and do some manual sharing in order to replicate what they would do.
In fact, that doesn't cover my question. Maybe I can give a real life example.
Well, let me. The thing that would automate sort of the data-based sharing would be using Apex sharing, and we'll talk about that, sharing via Apex. Okay. Why don't we actually talk about it right now? All right, enough foreshadowing. All right, so one of the things that you can do is you can automate sharing of records by writing some logic in Apex in which you then specify that you write the code that identifies the condition. So if this record is, you know, if the department is equal to this and the status is this, then I want it to be shared with this person. I want to grant, you know, whoever this person is, access to it. What you can do is you could write some Apex code that does just that. And the way that this works is that you write the code that identifies whenever the record is being saved to the database, what's called an Apex trigger would fire. It would then identify, well, who's the user that you want to share it with? It might be on the record, or you might have some other unrelated object that contains the data of who it is you want to share it with. The current record, you would then share that record with that user, and you would reference something called a sharing reason. Now, a sharing reason is something that you declaratively create for the purpose of auditing and figuring out why people have access to certain records. This is a reason that you declare that your code would then reference. So if we go to our position object, down at the bottom of the position object is an